Every SUV and crossover these days seems to need a ruggedized version, and even more so, every brand seems to need a sub-brand for these more capable vehicles. For Honda, it's Trail Sport, and this here is the 2025 Honda Pilot Trail Sport. Now, it got refreshed this year, and I haven't had a chance to drive the Trail Sport yet, so I'm gonna put more miles on this and a whole lot more dust and see what it's all about. See if it really is a more off-road capable Pilot, or if it's just a Pilot with some beefy tires. The Pilot follows the recent trend with these more rugged SUVs by adding a bit of actual capability to the package, but I'll get to that in a little bit. Let's start with the outside. So on the exterior, the most noticeable change are the smaller 18-inch wheels that have all-terrain tires, and there's steel skid plates underneath the vehicle, as well as recovery points front and rear. There's obviously Trail Sport badges to let people know that you have the rugged Pilot, but otherwise, most of the bits and pieces on the outside are available on other trims of the Pilot, maybe not quite in this combination though. Speaking of the exterior, it's pretty much the same as when the new generation Pilot came out. I'm a fan. I like the boxier look. It looks cleaner and a little, maybe not more modern, but I don't think it's gonna age as fast. Inside, it's a similar story. The Trail Sport's a mid-grade trim within the Pilot family, and this really feels like a mid-grade interior. There's soft touch materials in most locations, and it's very conservatively styled and very black. It doesn't have much character, but it is functional. The climate control consists of a couple of dials and buttons. There's a nice open spot to put your phone for phone charging. There's storage all over the place in the center console. Infotainment system, not the best on the market, but definitely not the worst. It's easy enough to figure out. It's just feels a little dated, but hooking up Apple CarPlay or Android Auto wirelessly was simple enough. And if you want a wired connection, there's 3 ports right here below the climate control, which are easy to locate and easy to use. But it's always sort of been the Pilot's thing, is function over form. And with this gen, they've kept the function, but given it a little better form. So I'm a fan of that. There's a half digital gauge cluster in front of me where I can customize the left-hand dial, whereas the right hand is just a static speedometer. Of course, further down the center console, just in front of the armrest, is the push-button gear selector. And say what you will about these systems, they're growing on me, especially ones that are concise like this. It takes up about as much space as a traditional gear selector lever would, but I guess without the lever sticking up, it's easier to get to the cup holders. But like I said, this one's easy enough to use, and there's very little chance this one could get left in gear when you get out of the vehicle. And if you open the door, it's smart enough to know it's time to put it in park. There are some Trail Sport specific features inside. Most obvious, the orange stitching that kind of contrasts all of the black. It's on the dash and the doors and the seats themselves say Trail Sport in the headrest. This is the only Pilot model that comes with 2 captain's chairs standard right out of the gate. So that makes this Pilot a 7-seater, but those captain's chairs can fold flat, and you obviously can only fold one if you want and use the other one up. So it adds a little more flexibility to storage, because people who buy this model may need to throw a couple bikes in the back or other outdoor gear. So if there's only 3 or 2 people going, it's easy to turn this into a huge storage compartment in behind the front seats. Speaking of seats, the front seats in the Pilot, I've always been a fan of. They're quite comfortable, and that hasn't changed. They fit my body type quite well, and they're power adjustable to fit many other body types, but of course some people may not find it the right position, but for me it just fits. Stepping back to the next 2 rows, middle seat with the captain's chairs, I mean, there's all the space for pretty much any sized adult. Headroom's quite generous with the panoramic sunroof. Legroom is adjustable. You can put the seat as far forward or back as you need to. So 4 full-size adults could ride in this in perfect comfort for hours and hours. Now, going back a row to the 3rd row, that's still probably the place where you're gonna put adolescents or children more. But that said, this is one of the more spacious 3rd rows on the market in this class. It's not quite as big as, say, the Volkswagen Atlas, but it's bigger than a lot of its competition, like the Highlander, the Ascent, the Pathfinder, things like those. Although the specs may not fully back that up, in real world sitting, this is one of the few 3 rows that I can sit in. I mean, my knees are up to my chest, but I have enough headroom and enough legroom that I could handle being back there for short trips. So enough about all that. Let's get into how the Trail Sport actually performs on and off the road. So like every other Pilot, it has a 3.5 liter V6. Here it makes 285 horsepower, which is no different than every other trim. What is different is there's some different tuning between the engine and the automatic that's designed for better performance off-road. So specifically, if you're in trail or mud, you'll get these slightly different engine mappings that should make the Trail Sport go further through the dirt and mud than a regular Pilot. And I mean, the number one thing that's gonna allow drivers to do that are the tires. As mentioned, there's 18-inch wheels, and on them are Continental all-terrain tires. When you're not stuck in traffic like I am, which is probably where these pilots are gonna spend most of their time, it's really meant for those sandy, gravelly, or dirt roads that can take you to your favorite hiking spot or camping location, or maybe a nice bike trail or fishing hole. You know, the roads that are kind of maintained, but not really. They're full of potholes, there's washed out sections that you have to navigate, there could be mud holes, all those sort of things that these tires will help grip better, especially when it's in the trail mode. And since the roads can be unpredictable, there's an extra inch of ground clearance on the Pilot Trail Sport as well. So it's up to 8.3 inches compared to the 7.3 that every other Pilot comes with. Now that's not as high as, say, the Subaru Ascent, but it is a decent increase. And if something is still a little too deep for this vehicle, like I mentioned, there's steel skid plates to protect the underbody. So the road I tried taking it on was actually recently groomed, so it was pretty soft, but I could tell when cornering or when accelerating or especially braking, there is a little more bite. The suspension too, obviously since the vehicle's sitting higher, is tuned slightly differently, and that combined with the squishier, higher sidewall tires really absorb a lot of those potholes and big stones or boulders on these trails. So not only can the Pilot venture further down them, it's also a more pleasant ride than if you're in just a regular Pilot, especially with the 20-inch wheels. With a lot of those activities I mentioned, especially camping or biking, there's a good chance you'll need to mount or tow something behind the Pilot, and the Trail Sport does come with a Class 3 receiver as standard equipment. Again, the only Pilot that gets that right out of the gate. So far so good, right? And for the most part, this is good. There are very few drawbacks. One is personal taste and preference. Like I said, the interior is a little drab, and being a mid-trim, it's missing some features. But the real sort of change that I don't think is a big deal, but some people might not like, comes with the way it actually drives. So by raising the vehicle up and adding those squishier all-terrain tires, Honda still states it didn't affect the Pilot's handling, and I think that's a bit of a stretch. This isn't exactly a sports car, and it wasn't even the best handling 3-row crossover, but it was definitely one of the better ones. And what I've noticed is if you really try to hustle it on an on-ramp or through some corners, you can feel more body roll for sure, and you can feel the front tire less willing to bite in and grip, which again, these are all things that she expected when you get a more rugged version like this. So although it might not have as much ultimate mechanical grip, it still has good responses. The steering's always been pretty good for the class. I mean, Honda's good at doing steering, and it hasn't changed here. Any sort of input I give the vehicle, it responds to quite quickly and in a very predictive manner. It's something that just makes the Pilot really easy to drive, and that's important in this class. I mean, most of these SUVs that are in competition with the Pilot are easy to drive as well. But this one has more of a minivan feeling behind the wheel, and I do not mean that in a bad way at all. What I mean is, like, minivans are some of the easiest vehicles to drive, and a lot of that's really translated to this, yet it's got sort of those all-terrain bits on it, so it could go further down the dirt trails. So like I said, off-road, or not really off-road, but on dirt and gravel trails, it absorbs bumps better than a regular Pilot would, and on pavement, it's the exact same thing. There are some stretches of road that I was very impressed how well this just sort of smoothed out all of the cracks and broken pavement and sort of mismatched layers of pavement. It just does a good job. As far as engine transmission goes, it's no different than a regular Pilot, and the changes they've made aren't noticed behind the wheel. So it's still one of the holdouts with a naturally aspirated V6. There's still a couple on the market, but compared to some of the other V6s still out there, like the Hyundai Palisade, Kia Telluride, or Nissan Pathfinder, there's better flexibility in the power band in this vehicle. This engine does seem to have better initial torque and a better spread of torque through the RPM range. With the Kia and Hyundai twins, I find that they're very top heavy when it comes to power, so there isn't much initially and then it really builds up to a lot at the high end. And with the Pathfinder, it's kind of the opposite. And it's more than just that power and torque figures. I mean, it's actually trailing some of its competition, or pretty much on par, but at highway speeds, if I hit the throttle, it seems to downshift faster and accelerate me quicker than some of its competition. It's also pretty fuel efficient, although the Trail Sport will give you a minor hit, thanks due to the higher rolling resistance from those all-terrain tires mostly. It's not just the smooth, rev-happy engine that makes the Pilot so responsive and easy to drive. A lot of that also has to do with this 10-speed automatic. I've always been a fan of it in a lot of Honda products, and the Pilot was one of them, and nothing's really changed here. It'd be easy to think a transmission with so many gears might spend its time hunting around for the proper gear and provide a not so smooth or seamless driving experience, but that's not really the case. It shifts gears so well and so softly that the driver isn't even aware of it most of the time. The safety systems in this vehicle are a little aggressive, especially the emergency braking. The vehicle flashes brake to me quite often. I know you can turn it off or adjust, but when it's on its default setting, it flashes quite often. And I wouldn't want to turn it off because it's nice to have that safety net, but at the same time, it's a lot of flashing in my face. The Trail Sport isn't going to go on any boulder-filled 4x4 trails or climb a mountain at Moab, and that's not what Honda's engineers designed it to do. It's to give Honda customers an option in a three-row vehicle to go a bit further when the pavement ends. And it's going to get probably abused more than a regular Pilot, as it'll carry, dirty backpacks, bikes, whatnot, so it's nice as a mid-trim model. And as it stands, it works really well on beat-up dirt and gravel roads like this, while having minimal trade-offs on the road. So you know what? For the adventurous types that want a three-row Honda, this does the job really well.